Morning. That's kind of weak. Good morning. Good morning. That's better. Man, did you notice today we had a really good-looking worship leader? Did you notice that? Man, shirt's ugly. The shirt's ugly. That's good. That's good. You get more excited about Oregon and Oregon State than you do about Jesus. This is really interesting. It's really interesting. See, my spiritual gift is harassment. Did you notice that? I'm the youngest of five. My brothers beat on me. I still have issues, so I take it out when I preach or talk to people. Tried taking it out on my marriage, but that didn't work very well. Okay. What I want to do tonight, when you're here, I hope you'll be here and some other people. I'm going to do a message that I've probably done entitled Three Chairs, which I think really illustrates more the major problem in our culture today. And I'll just kind of say that and maybe set it up. And it even dealt with some of the scriptures that you shared, Gene, this morning. But what I want to do right in this session is my wife and I kind of want us to go through what I would say are about 5 stages of parenting, from how our role changes from preschool to elementary to teenagers to empty nest to grandchildren, okay? And we'll just share with some scriptures and some insights that we have. Again, I appreciate your questions last night, and so afterwards, if you have some questions, please bring those up. And then at the end of this, I'm going to bring up a couple of our grandchildren and really get the truth from them instead of kind of what we've said, okay? So I think the first stage of parenting is basically that preschool age. And if you're taking notes at all, I think the role, when we have preschool children, we're a caretaker. And if we're a caretaker, our job for preschool kids is to provide and protect. Proverbs 22:6, train up a child in the way he should go, and when he is old, he will not turn from it. Now that scripture has often been misused. That is a promise. Wait a minute. It's a principle and not a promise. Got that backwards. In other words, just because you train up your kids in the best way that you can in Jesus Christ, there is no positive guarantee that every one of them is going to turn out that way. But the principle is, if you do everything as the best you can, the chances are it'll turn out that way. In fact, maybe a more correct understanding of this passage is train up a child in the way, his way. His way, meaning what? Every child is different. I made a mistake in this area. My mom and dad, I think when they grew up, they didn't change for each of us. They said, this is it, get with the program, or there's going to be some consequences. And so I thought it worked pretty good for me, maybe not my brothers or sisters, but it did for me. So when I decided to raise our children, I just said, okay, I'm going to raise them the same, and they're going to have to adjust. And I would tell you that I made some mistakes in that, because each one of them are different and did not respond the same way to the same instruction. Honey, what would you say are some things about that preschool age that we need to really, if you look back, what are some important things? And what would you say for young parents out here that have preschool kids?
Well, first of all, how many moms have or have had preschoolers? Raise your hand. Okay. In case you don't know it, that is probably one of the hardest jobs in the world. And the reason is because you don't get a day off. You don't get to take a break. You can't go to the bathroom by yourself. If you can lay down with them and take a nap, but chances are they're going to be pulling your eyelids open to see, are you awake, Mommy? It's a hard job to be the mom of a preschooler, and I think a lot of dads don't get that. And so when they come home like, what have you done today, honey? You're like, leave me alone. Take this kid. Go for a walk, get them out of my face. It's hard, but it's one of the most important jobs in the world, because those are the years when you are forming who they're going to be for the rest of their life. And so it's important that you make the right choices as best as you can. You're still going to make mistakes. We all make mistakes. I think I've found that one of the most important things is don't tell them what to do, give them choices, especially if you have what is often labeled a strong-willed child. They need to have choices. It's not that they want to control you, they just don't want to be controlled. So you can say, okay, you can go to bed at 9 o'clock and read for a half an hour, or you can go to bed at 9:30 and go right to sleep. Which would you rather do? And they'll make the choice, and then they're okay because it was their idea. So let them have choices. You like to have choices. We all like to have choices. So let them make choices, and then make sure that they understand consequences when they make wrong choices. There used to be a show on TV, I can't remember the name of it, but I used to watch it with my kids, and there was this little boy. He would come out, and he'd see his sister walk by with a balloon, and then you'd see these bubble thoughts come up, and he'd say, I'd like to break my sister's balloon. But if I break my sister's balloon, she's going to cry. And if she cries, my mom's going to want to know what's wrong, and she's going to tell her I broke her balloon, and then I'm going to be in trouble. I don't think I'll break her balloon. It's helping them walk through the consequences of the choices that they make and helping them understand that, life is about making the right choices. So.
I think another thing I would say to you, that this is my opinion. That means we can disagree and go to heaven, okay? What I do I feel sorry for parents today that are in public situations with disobedient preschoolers. Because when I grew up, it was okay for a mom or a dad to let them have it on the rear end and take care of it right there and move on. Now you do that and somebody will turn you in for child abuse, okay? It's a tough thing for parents. So what I do, if I am in any store or any place and I see a rebellious child and I see a parent handle that well, even seeing a mother walk around the corner of a counter and I know she blessed him, and I will go over and say, out of my way, young lady, I know it's tough in this culture, but I'm proud of you. Good job. Because kids have to learn consequence, and too often, because of that situation, parents have to warn them 15 times, because they really can't do what they want to do the first time. So hang in there with that. I think one of the most important ages is the elementary age. The first, a preschooler, you're a caretaker. As an elementary age, I believe you're a coach. And your job as a parent, as a coach, is to influence and instruct. And I'm going to share this more passage with tomorrow morning. I'm going to talk about developing spiritual champions. But I believe this is the foundational. There's not a lot of scriptures about parenting in the Bible. But I believe this one from the Old Testament is profound in raising children. Deuteronomy 6, these commandments I give you today are be upon your hearts. Impress them on your children. Talk about them when you sit at home, when you walk along the road, when you lie down, when you get up. Tie them as symbols on your hands and bind them on your foreheads. Write them on the door frames of your houses and on your gates. Statistics say that 60% of learning comes from watching others we trust. Now, here's a big difference, and I'm sorry that I'm old, but growing up on the farm, you see, I got to interact with my dad farming 4 hours a day, milking cows 2 hours in the morning, 2 hours at night. So this Deuteronomy 6 was lived out. We had the opportunity for that. When I moved into the city, like I said, preaching and my work ethic is a little messed up, so I can work 60 hours a week, doesn't bother me. That's why I started coaching my son in soccer, because I said, if I don't, I will not have time to spend with him, talking with him to and from practice, where we can live out Deuteronomy chapter 6. So you're going to have to figure that out, okay? For me as a pastor, I tried some things that didn't work. I tried family devotions. It didn't work. You know why? My kids would say, oh, here's another sermon. It didn't work. So what am I going to do? Beat them? I got to figure out some way to share biblical truth. So I believe this idea of influence and instruct, I believe the first thing is you have to model Jesus Christ. And as they watch you, your values are caught more than taught. but I'm also one that uses the everyday things of life as a teaching moment. I didn't even pray with my kids at night all the time before they went to bed. Bad father, raise your hand, okay? How in the world do they turn out as Christ followers? Well, they saw our own values. But secondly, here's a couple examples. What if I went to the mall and I saw a kid throwing a fit, disobeying their parents? I would stop my son or my daughter and say, look at that. What does that look like? What does that disobedience look like? How do you think it looks when you disobey us as mom and dad? How should they respond? Or back then, we watched football after Sunday. I'd preach 3 services on Saturday, 3 on Sunday. I was exhausted. I would come home, we'd watch football, and as almost every NFL football game, the commercials are who? Beer commercials. Almost everything's a beer commercial. And they talk about how happy they are. I would put my arm around my son and say, son, don't believe that stuff. They don't show that guy getting drunk and coming home and beating his wife. They don't show that guy having a wreck on the way home and injuring somebody else. That's to me how we teach everyday life against the values that are going on. Use life as the laboratory. And I think that's so important at that elementary age. You see, but the problem is you can't get God's word into your kids if God's word is not in you. So they're going to see what you do, what you don't do. Anything you would say about the elementary age?
One of the most successful things that we did when our youngest daughter was probably about 8 years old and our 2 older kids were like junior high, we did a family small group where we invited other families that had kids about the age of ours. Now, the kids have to be old enough to read in order for this to be successful, but our youngest daughter always wanted to read the scripture. When it's time to read, she'd say, I'll do it, Dad. So she started reading the scripture, and it came to a phrase that said, how was that stated?
The church will be presented as a pure virgin to Christ.
And she got to that word virgin and just stopped. She said, I'm not saying that word.
Now, by the way, we had junior high boys in there from other families. 100% attention at this point.
Yeah.
Okay.
And so he goes, well, why? Do you know what that word means? And she said, yeah, I know what it means. And he said, well, what does it mean? She said, it means you haven't done it with anybody yet. And,
8 years of age.
And he's like, well, how did you know that?
I'm stupid. Most preachers would stop after the first and pray and leave, but I asked her that.
And she said, well, Mom and I were watching a movie, and this guy talked this girl into doing it because he said he loved her, and then he left her, and she was all alone, and she was sorry she did it. So Mom explained that to me, what that was all about. And so I don't ever want to do that. And it was just one of those moments when I took the time to explain what was being played out on the screen, and she got it. And so when she was in junior high and her girlfriend said, how long are you going to wait till you have sex? She said, what do you mean? I'm going to wait till I get married. Her friend was like, why? She said, because that's what God wants me to do. So, it just planted that seed for her to make the right choices. So use those everyday opportunities to teach God's truth. And just the other thing I wanted to say was that there's a lot of things about our kids' lives that we have to say no to. They're always asking us stuff, and so many times we have to say no. But my advice is say yes when you can, because sometimes it's okay. We just automatically say no, and if we think about it, why not? Why not let them do that? Let them spread their wings. Let them experience a little bit of life. So if you can say yes, say yes.
We also tried to have our home. My wife was a stay-at-home mom, and for my opinion here, for you stay-at-home moms, a lot of you feel like you're probably not making a difference. You talk to other women that have careers and making big money, and you think, man, I'm not making a difference. And I believe with all my heart, the most important job for a mother is to raise the kids, be there to raise the kids when they're little, especially. I don't want preschool, somebody else raising my kids or my grandkids. I'd rather the parents do that. That's my opinion. The problem is with a stay-at-home mom, you don't see the reward until about 10 to 15 years later. And that's why you really get discouraged. But I'm so thankful. So much of how our kids turned out, I attribute to my wife. You know, she said one thing about those family small groups. Those are the greatest learning I've ever seen. You know why? Kids are honest. If you meet together in small groups with adults your whole life, as a pastor, I'm going to share with you, about 25% of the time they're lying. They're lying. If you have junior high kids in that small group, they'll tell the truth. I would say, like, we're talking about family values, and I'd say to you, do your family have devotions? And the parents would say, oh yeah, we have family devotions. And the junior high boy goes, we don't either. You know, well, I mean, right away, that's interesting. I had, and I'll move on, has nothing to do with this, but I thought I'd throw it in. I had a group of that small group. I had a Catholic family, people raised in the Christian church, unchurched people, and a Mormon family. And one person, we were talking about, will the kids go to a high school dance? And I said, sure, my kids can go to a dance. And the Church of Christ non-instrumental people said, will they touch each other? I mean, because that was a no-no for them. Mormons use school dances for outreach to get non-Mormon kids. Okay, but that was an interesting discussion with just right there in a real life setting, dealing with some of those things. Also, this one junior high boy, I'll never forget, we got ready to have a prayer time. And I just turned to him and said, man, why don't you start the prayer time? And he did. And when we got through, his dad was crying. And afterwards I said, what's the problem? And he said, I have never heard my son pray. So anyway, so those family groups are a risk, but I believe they're great, because in that elementary age, they need to see you and mom and dad model it out, I believe. Number 3 is the teenage years. Hang on. As a teenager, I believe you need, as a parent, to be a counselor. Listen and lead. Ephesians 6:4, fathers, do not exasperate your children. Instead, bring them up in the training and instruction of the Lord. Because the real key at the high school age is to help them determine their values before they leave home. Because, see, if you live in a very sheltered environment where your kids are not allowed to determine their own values, when they leave, immediately the world confronts them with everything they've ever been taught. And I believe it is better while they're in high school to experiment with the real world and be in the real world, and they have a chance to come back and bounce some of those values off of you. My wife is a way better listener than I am. True story. When we were in high school, if my kids called home, if they wanted to do something, they would call home and say, is mom there? And if I answered the phone and said, she's not here, you know what they'd say? I'll call back. Because they knew I would tend to say no and then think about it. She has more wisdom. She would talk through it with them and help them make a decision. So she was way better about that than I was. Anything you would say about teenage years?
I think one of the most important things you can do is remember what it felt like to be a teenager. I think too many parents have forgotten how hard that was. All the stuff that's going on in your body, in the peer pressure, at school. I think we've forgotten how hard it is to be a teenager. There's a lot of stuff that's coming down on you. And if you can stop and remember what that's like, you can talk to them about it. They might not believe you. They'll be like, well, what do you know? You don't know what I'm going through. And then you can pull out your yearbook. And when I did that, my kids were like, oh, Mom, did anybody like you? I said, well, yes, actually, I was quite popular. But
she had glasses that looked like Coke bottles was the reason.
That's true.
Yeah.
These are readers because I've had about 20 surgeries on my eyes. But anyway, I think the most important thing that you can do is let your kids know you've been through that. You know what it feels like to be where they're at. And if they can... if you can gain their respect and their trust through sharing things that you've been through, then they'll listen to you and they'll take your advice. But you have to be patient with that, and just remember, I know it's hard. I've been there. But the other thing you can do is you can give them an out. You can say, okay, I'll let you go to this party, but if you get there and there's stuff going on that you don't want to be a part of, all you have to do is call me or tell your friends, you know what, my mom said I have to be home right now, so I got to go. Or, whatever you got to do, be the bad guy for them so that they can save face with their friends and still not be a part of what's going on. I think it's just important. It's important to help them understand that they can trust you because you know what it's like.
I think another thing we tried to do was make sure our house was a place where they wanted their friends wanted to come and hang out. So, because I believe, first of all, if their friends are coming to my house, I know what kind of friends they're hanging out with. And I'd rather see what goes on at my house than guess and pray what's happening on at somebody else's house. So I think make your house a place that's a cool place to hang out, that they maybe would like to bring their friends.
One more thing is don't ever stop parenting because you think this kid's okay. We've got this covered. Because our youngest daughter was 5 years younger than the other two. And so for a lot of her teen years, I felt like she was my buddy. We hung out, we did stuff together. But she was also hanging out with friends, and these were church kids. And I would see her, her friend's purse sitting there had cigarettes in it, and I thought, oh, if her mom knew that was going on. Well, all the time, I didn't know what was going on because I thought we had it handled. And so when we found out that our daughter was smoking marijuana, and this was back when it wasn't okay, like it is now, I was devastated. I was torn up. And I said, how did this happen? And we didn't know about it. She said, Mom, you trusted me too much. So you can't just assume that they're going to do the right thing. You've got to continue to be the parent, and you got to check up on them. You got to see who they're with, what they're doing, what's in their purse, who they're talking to, and all that stuff.
Yeah, and that was interesting because our first two kids, when we started our church, our kids were in junior high, and then she was 5 years younger. But it just so happened that probably about 8 of those families that ended up in those first couple years being in our church were really serving strong Christians. And so our oldest two kids, almost all of their friends came from very strong Christian families. And it's interesting that I would say 80% of them ended up going to the Christian college and are in full-time ministry. But it's interesting that those same families, 4 years later, their younger kids were the same ones that our youngest daughter were hanging out with. So just because some of your kids are doing good doesn't mean they all are. And so I remember my youngest daughter saying, I cannot wait to get into high school youth group because of how much fun I see my older brother and sister having. And yet when she got in the church youth group with the same families, their brothers and sisters 5 years later, it was a totally different experience. And I would have never seen that. Yeah. And again, and you know what made that even more interesting? Her older brother, who was the youth pastor, had just graduated from Bible college and came back to intern at our church. And my son, who was the intern youth pastor, was in our living room doing intervention between us and his younger sister. Okay? And it was good because we didn't kill her, thanks to him. All right? And teenagers, man, I wish they were still in here for this one. But teenagers have it tough today, because the values of so many kids that even go to church are not Christian at all, okay? And so you just really encourage your kids in that. Number 4 is empty nest. Empty nest, I believe you need to be confident. And at that age, when you're an empty nest, you're going to advise and affirm. Proverbs 3:5, trust in the Lord with all your heart. Lean not on your own understanding. In all your ways acknowledge him, and he will make your paths straight. When your kids leave home and they're college and you're an empty nester, I believe you no longer are the major enforcer of what is right and what is wrong. You are a sounding board as they struggle with the consequences of their own decisions. And I think it's our job then is to help our kids when they make mistakes, even as empty nesters, to learn from it so that they don't repeat the same mistakes over and over and over. And there's a major change in this stage of life When I grew up, I know I'm an old person, you couldn't wait to get your driver's license at age 16. You couldn't wait to get away from home. We got married when, were you 19 or 20? 19, and I was 20. We had our first job. We had our first child at 21. Today, you know what age the average person is getting married? Guys are 30 and women are 28. And you know part of the problem? Because mom and dad are still paying all the bills and letting them live at home rent-free. So I want to say to you, the major problem with this young generation growing up is not the kids, it's baby boomer parents. Can I get an amen on that one? No. Okay? Why? Because when you spoil your kids and give them everything, they are not prepared for tough times. You have raised them to be too soft. So give your kids responsibility when they're in those teenage years. And I believe, my opinion, when they graduate, our kids, we said to them, everybody's different. When they went away to college and they said, we're going to come back and maybe after a couple years of college and live with you and mom and dad, I go, okay, but if you do, you don't get the same rules. You will still have the same rules you did when you were in high school. Well, we're older. I said, you're still acting the same. If you can't take care of yourself, when you come back home, you're going to have the same curfew. Well, they didn't come back home. Okay? But I believe that. And so I believe today, don't be afraid in this, what we usually would say is an empty nest, but now many of them are still at home for 5 years. A lot of kids today don't even get their driver's license at 16. It is totally different. Shut up, Don. You're not preaching, you're complaining. Okay, so what about, because here's the key statement. Maturity does not come with age. Maturity comes with responsibility. And that's why some kids that are 13 years old that have had a lot of responsibility growing up are more mature than some kids that are 24. Okay? So, what about this, honey? This empty nest. What are some things you found that works and some of the things maybe we did different?
I'm trying to think. I was excited about having an empty nest to a certain degree. It's sad when that last one leaves home. But on the other hand, once they were gone, I always knew where my comb was. My car radio was always right where I left it. There were a lot of things that had always bothered me that didn't bother me anymore. But then I realized when they did come home, I got upset because they messed things up. And so it was really more about how I became kind of selfish once they were gone. I got used to having things my own way, and I realized I was becoming a selfish person because I didn't have to share my life with these annoying children anymore. So I had to make some adjustments. But I think one of the most important things about kids going away is allowing them to be who they are and not expecting them to be who you are. Let them grow into the talents and the personality and the way that God has made them. Let them make choices about things that you might not make. Let them reach the end result a different way than you would have reached the end result, and be okay with that, because ultimately they're God's kids. And so they know better than you do, really, how He's created them. And if they can learn to rely on God for guiding them and showing them the direction to go, they're going to accept that with less rebellion than they are if you say, oh, I wouldn't do that. If I were you, I'd do it this way. Instead, say, you know what? If that's the way you think God wants you to do it, go ahead and try it. See how it works. If it doesn't work out, you can always try it a different way. But I think giving them some freedom to be who they are is really important at that age, because there's going to come a time when you're not going to be around, and they have to learn how to make choices that please God and not you. Make sense?
Yeah, you can see as you're listening to this, hopefully, panel here, she's way more of a Christian than I am. Okay? She was, the kids would much rather come and talk to her than talk to me. Okay?
Well, he tends to give advice, even if you don't ask for it. And I think that's one thing that you got to remember with your kids. If they're not asking for your advice, don't give it to them. If they ask for it, yeah. And they'll ask for it more often if you're not constantly giving it to them. And I think we've learned that.
And here's one thing we learned. Our parenting styles, we never gave the kids different answers from each one of us. Nothing can mess up a kid more than because then what will happen, they'll go to the parent that gives them more what they want. So if we had issues with our kids and we disagreed growing up, and we made sure we were on the same page giving advice before we gave it to them. There's some books, before I go to the last one here, there's some books I'd encourage you to read. The Birth Order is I don't know who wrote it, but the Birth Order, I think, is one of the best books out there for understanding differences in kids. Different personality tests you can give your kids. When our kids were dating seriously, and before they got engaged, I set them down around the kitchen table and made them and their significant other do a personality test. Now, that's weird. When our two oldest were dating and about ready to get engaged, we went to California with them, and I plugged in a marriage tape, and I'll never forget it. They were from good Christian families, and this is how weird I am. I plugged in the tape, they listened to it, I uncorked it, and I turned to my son, who was about to get engaged to his future wife, and I said, "Can I ask you a question?" She said, "Sure." I go, "Does my son turn you on?" Yeah, see how dumb I am? It got kind of quiet. And she goes, my parents, we never talked about this. I go, "Well, does he or doesn't he? It's a pretty easy question." She said, "Yeah, he does." I go, "Good, hope so. You headed the right way." Okay, that was a bomb. We'll move on past that one, all right? But anyway, I was very real with my kids and who they dated. Not always, but the birth order, the first child is usually compliant and an achiever. The second child often is strong-willed and rebellious because they can't compete with perfect. And if you have 3 children, the third one is often a people person. They learn how to put 1 against 2 when they're growing up to get what they want. Now, once you have 4 or 5, you will find out the other siblings will impact their upbringing often more than you as mom and dad. Because my brothers were that way. If my brothers would do something to me and I'd say, "If you do that again to me, I'm going to go tell Dad and you're going to get a whipping." And my brother would say, "Okay, you can do that, but I want you to know if Dad whips me for working you over, I'll work you over when he gets through with me." Well, you pray about that and you realize this might not be a good decision. 1's better than 2, okay? So that took me a while. All right, number 5, what about grandchildren? I believe when you have grandchildren, you should be their cheerleader. And you should give them experiences and encouragement. Proverbs 17:6, "Children's children are a crown to the aged, and parents are the pride of their children." Psalm 71:18, "Even when I am old and gray, do not forsake me, O God, until I declare your power to the next generation." This is something that we've really changed. We didn't do a lot of the same things with our kids that we're doing with our grandkids. And the reason why is we were broke. I'm serious. As a preacher, if I would go back and do it again, and for those of you if you're young preachers or leaders in here, I would say even ask the church to pay. When you have to go away on a mission trip, don't be afraid. Let the church to pay for your kids to go with you on the mission trip. Build memories in those ways. I wish, as much as I traveled and spoke when I had kids, I would have taken one of the kids individually with me when we would go out for a weekend or a conference, and I could do one-on-one time with them. I never did that. And I wish I would have had that individual time with each one of them. But for my wife and I, we are real big on making memories instead of making money. And I would say to you grandparents, the most important thing you can do is not leave a bunch of money to your grandkids, but use some of that money while you're still alive to make memories with them. This is huge for us. For example, when our grandkids turn 13, we take them away at 2 at a time and we go build a memory. We're gone for about a week and we build a memory. When they graduate from high school, I take the boy and their father and we go build a memory for a week. She takes the granddaughters and their mother and they go away and build a memory for a week. Our 3 kids are all in ministry, so they're still broke, and we have a little more than they do. So for every 5 years, my wife and I, we do a cruise with all of our kids and grandkids, and we pay for everything. And right now, we've been married 55 years, and we couldn't get it done in August, but over Thanksgiving, it'll be our 4th family cruise, maybe 5th, 4 or 5 together. We try to do it every 5 years to build memory. It's funny now because a lot of our grandchildren are getting married, and they'll go, "Grandpa, can I take my boyfriend?" And I go, "Does he have a ring on you? Are you married?" "Nope, tough. You either get married quick or wait 5 years. He ain't going. I'm not paying for him." And that's kind of a fun thing that we do. At our holidays, it's really changed for us because we now have our first great-grandchild. It was more difficult for us. You can take this advice however you want, but in the ministry, it's different. Because a lot of you have traditions where you have to go and open gifts on Christmas, at Christmas morning at a certain family, or Christmas Eve, or that sort of thing. We couldn't do that in our family because I had Christmas Eve services 3 nights before Christmas Eve. You know, we were gone all the time. So we had to say, when we got married, we told our families, we're going to be there 1 year for Thanksgiving and the next year for Christmas, and you've got to learn to flip back and forth. So when our kids got married in the ministry, they were able to do the same thing. I would tell you now that it's down to the 3rd generation. That's not working that well. You got to please 3 generations, and it's way more difficult. So now we've decided, even the last couple years, whenever we get together, we're going to try and take advantage of it because we don't know. Okay? So when we get together for Christmas, we've done a couple different things. For example, instead of giving gifts about 5 years ago, I said, you know what? This year, in Thanksgiving, I'm going to give each of you grandkids $100. And what I want you to do is find a homeless person or a single mom or somebody that needs blessed, and I want you to get together as a family and figure out how to bless them for Christmas. And your Christmas gift to us is to write a letter and tell us what you did with the money. And so we did that for 2 years, and they loved it. Okay? But when we get together for Christmas, for example, 2 years ago, I said, we're all Christians. We've been blessed. Tell me this year what God has done in your life to make a difference for Jesus Christ. I have a granddaughter that's in Italy in the Milan Art School that is using art for mission work. She came back and shared the struggles she was going through. Last year, I said, okay, we're a Christian family. We don't want to act like everything is great. Let's this year share with some of the struggles that we've gone through trying to be Christ followers. Some of the mistakes we've made so that they know it's okay to fail. Are you with me? And so what I'm doing is those memories, whenever we get together, that's our job, I believe, as grandparents, to reinforce the biblical values that we've even tried with their parents, and we try to do that in a different way. Anything you want to share with that, dear?
Just that they're busy. You're busy. Everybody's busy. So don't wait for them to initiate time together. Try to plan something intentionally to do with them, even if it's just, hey, can I meet you for lunch this week? What day do you have open? You know, just take some time to plan something with your grandchildren intentionally.
You even started doing a Bible study with some of your granddaughters.
I did. I invited 3 of my granddaughters to do a Bible study with me, and we made it through about 3 weeks before the schedules. I mean, they all have jobs, so it was hard to find a time when we could actually do that. But just taking the initiative to even have those 3 times together when we could talk about God's Word together I thought it was awesome.
Okay, before maybe even question answer, I want to call up 2 of my grandkids that are here now ministering in Oregon. Abby and Jake, would you come on up here? Abby, they're both working. Yeah, get them to cheer for you. Jake, you can stand behind me, and Abby, you get the chair. You're the lady. Abby graduated from high school, and this past summer she was in Ireland, as a intern doing worship for the youth there and has traveled. Jake, and so this is her first week in the youth area at Northwest Christian Church, correct? Jake graduated from college and then went a year with International Justice Mission to work in Ghana with sex trafficking, and that was a really unbelievable experience for him. He started as a youth pastor 1 year ago at Northwest, and 10 months ago got married. 9 months goes quick, doesn't it? Real quick. His wife, Carly. Carly, raise your hand, okay? They're newly married. All right? So, Sue, I'm going to let you go first with Abby. Abby, your 13th trip memory, and then you and Grandma just recently were able to go for your senior trip. Sue, ask her any question, and Abby, please tell the truth. No, your grandpa is nice. No, okay.
She always tells the truth. Well, I didn't practice any questions, Abby. I didn't know. I thought he was going to ask questions. So let me say, what did it mean to you to have a trip when you were 13 years old? All the other kids got to go 2 at a time. You were the last one with nobody to go with you. So what did you think about going on a trip with your old grandparents?
I looked forward to it, actually, all growing up. I was like, oh, I can't wait till I'm 13. And then I realized I wasn't going with anyone. I was like, lame. But then I realized that you guys didn't have to spend as much money, so I could just get more stuff and hang out more. And everyone else had to drive on their trip, and I got to fly. And I was like, but no, it was a good time. And I think it was, I don't actually remember all of it, but the parts I remember was just us hanging out, playing cards, like talking about different things. So I'm thankful that I got to go with you guys. And it was a good experience, yeah.
All right, and then when we did your senior trip, your mom and I and you, how are you feeling about that? I mean, just
Tell them where you went.
we went to Hawaii.
Something for Jesus.
I took all of my granddaughters and their moms to Hawaii when they graduated from high school. Some of them got delayed because of COVID, but we ended up there eventually. But Abby and her mom they're two of my favorite people to be with. They're fun. And we had a good time, but were you having was there anything concerning about you and looking forward to that trip? Or did you think it was just going to be fun?
Oh, no, nothing was concerning. Okay. I thought it would be fun. Yeah, it was fun. It was a good time. Yeah, nothing too serious. I don't remember. I don't think so. You got sick.
I did get sick. We found out that Katy Perry was doing a concert at a hotel there, and we couldn't go to the concert, of course, because it was a private thing, but it was on the beach, and all the beaches are public in Hawaii. So every local person in that whole area was on the beach that night. We got there early.
Yeah.
You want to tell them about it?
And you fell asleep in the middle of all these people drinking and partying. She just fell asleep on the beach in the middle of the concert. And my mom goes, I think it's time to go. And I was like, yeah. So.
All right.
Well, let me just ask one more question.
Yeah.
So, was there anything about either of those trips that we did or that we didn't do that helped you move into your future, or helped you learn something you would or would not want to do in your future?
I don't think either way, but I think it was just good to like hear some of your guys' upbringing and things you would have changed, and then to like kind of reflect on that and think how like I could do it different in my life. But it also wasn't like too serious, and I appreciated that for like my personality. But I think what came out of it was good memories, good experience.
Okay.
Good job. So Jake got to go with his cousin for our 13th.
San Diego, not
San
Hawaii.
Diego, and then we went, because he's a Dodger fan, we went to go to the Dodgers, and
You
great.
hear that, David? Go Dodgers.
And then our 13th trip, all the women got to go to Hawaii. I took the grandsons to Washington, D.C.
High graduation, high school.
Yeah, after high school graduation. And because it was amazing to me, I think, how many kids that go through high school and don't even understand really a lot of what our country's all about. So that was different. Share some of the things with those experiences, good or bad.
Yeah, I think both of those experiences were great. I don't remember the 13 trip as much because it was a while ago, but that was 2 cousins, and then going to DC was amazing. I think that there was even something, and this sounds weird to say, but like learning how to travel. And you had traveled a lot and had a very specific way that you liked to travel. And my dad had traveled a lot and had a way that he liked to travel. And I hadn't traveled at all because I was 17. So I had no idea like how to go through an airport or what it meant to like pack a carry-on bag. Like, you're going to be gone for a week and you better do it in a carry-on because we're not checking any luggage. And just figuring out how to get through an airport and do it well and efficiently. And I just think there was a lot of things about that trip in particular. And then reflecting on my years after high school, how much traveling I did do. I kind of learned how to travel, and I know that was not the intent of that trip, was to teach me how to travel, but that was kind of the thing that I learned, was how do I travel, as weird as it sounds, like as a man. So I don't know if that makes sense, but I think that was one of the big things I took away from that trip.
Okay. Then we were able to bless. Our ministry takes a lot of preachers to Israel, and I was able to take my 4 grandsons to Israel just a few months ago.
Yeah, that was pretty much going to be one of the most amazing trips I'll probably ever take in my entire life, was having you lead a trip of pastors to Israel with me and my 3 male cousins who I've been lucky enough to be really close with. They're 3 of my best friends. And so getting to see the Bible alive in 3D is amazing. So if you ever have the chance to go to Israel, that's awesome. But going with your family is something even more special because you get to have conversations in a way that you wouldn't normally get to have them. It goes from being academic or spiritual for sure, but now it's really relational. I felt like that was a pretty impactful trip for me, not just from a ministry standpoint. It's already affected the way I preach to high school kids because I've been to the places we're talking about, but it's changed the way that I do devotional time. I mean, Russell and Riley, we still talk about the trip when we text. We'll bring up memories and send pictures to each other, and it wasn't that long ago, but yeah, I think we'll always look back as that was a really amazing memory and a pretty unique opportunity that we got to be a part of.
Anything you would say to grandparents out here about the whole idea of making memories?
Yeah, I think when I was listening to you talk, I've heard you tell people about this idea that we go on a cruise every 5 years and we spend time together as a whole family, and like that's a pretty unbelievable thing that we get to do and that we don't have to pay for it, that you guys provide for that to happen. And I was just thinking, like, I'm sure there's some of you, like, that's far-fetched. I'll never be able to do that for my grandkids. Like, I'm not going to be able to. There's 11 grandkids, 3 parents. You're never going to be able to pay for that many people to go on a cruise for a week. It's not logistically possible. And then you reminded me of the memories of the last few Christmases where we were all together and we just sat in a room and answered these different questions really honestly and vulnerably. And the cruises have been amazing and it's fun to hang out, but in some ways those conversations at Christmas have meant more to me than those cruises have. Just sharing honestly and vulnerably with your grandparents and with your parents and hearing them share about their faith and their struggles in life and being the 3rd generation looking up to that. So yeah, you might not be able to take all your family on a cruise, but you can sit around the table and have an honest conversation about things that are really awesome and things that have really sucked over the last little while, and sharing that honestly and vulnerably together, I thought was really amazing.
You know, one of the only thing we require on the cruise is we all have to eat dinner together at night. And I remember, Abby, a good one on you, because, you know, on the cruise, you get to pick this, and this, and eat kind of what you want. And after we got off the boat, we were in the airport, or we were in a hotel airport in Fort Lauderdale waiting to go home, and we went and ordered some food, and we got ready to order, and Abby says, I'll take one of these, and one of these, and one of these. And we had to say, time out, we're not on the cruise ship. You just get to order one thing, you know, but that was kind of different. That might be another question. Any questions any of you have for any 4 of us about anything that we've shared so far in parenting? Yes, ma'am.
So you hit really hard on like stay-at-home moms, specifically through the preschool and elementary age. But we're in 2023. Reality is we have a lot of working moms and single moms. And so how do we, like, what would you speak to on that? Because probably more
Yeah. No, I get that. I get that. It's difficult to live on one salary in today's world. That's a given. I think it just makes your job harder, that much harder. You have to be that much more intentional about the time you do have with your kids. You have to plan things on purpose and take time to be with them and to be involved in their lives as much as you possibly can. You don't have to be at home with them to stay on top of what they're doing, you know? You just got to talk to them. Communication is so key in just saying, okay, who are you going to be with? Where are you going to go? What time are you going to be home? And you have the means to keep in touch with them 24/7, which we never had. So that can be a good thing if it's used correctly. Let them know that you're always there for them. All they got to do is text you a code word or whatever, and you'll call them back and you'll say, you have to be home right now. And then they can tell their friends, my mom is really upset. I got to get home right now. You know, you just got to work it out. You got to work it out with them. Intentionality has become a big word for me because I realize nothing happens without intentionality. I'm not going to lose weight if I'm not intentional about it. You know, my kids are not going to make decisions right if I am not intentional about being involved in their lives and feeding them God's word in a way that they can understand it. If they see me living it out, they're going to catch on to that. But if they hear me say it and don't see me living it, they're going to be like, you're a hypocrite. You know, why should I go to church if you don't go to church? Why should I not get drunk on Friday night if you're getting drunk on Friday night? You got to make choices that align with God's word, and they'll get that. Does that help at all?
Yeah. And I think there's a difference between the single mom and the married mom. Okay, so if you're a single mom and you know, in divorce and you're trying to raise all those kids, sometimes that situation, you have no choice. You have to work and do everything. I think there is a difference for a married couple. And what we tried to teach our children was you better talk about some important things while you're dating before you get married. Do you want to be a stay-at-home mom? Are we going to try and keep up with the Joneses? Today, you can raise your family on one salary. I'm sorry.
You just have to do without a lot of stuff.
Bingo. You have to decide. For example, the money it costs to keep your kids in year-round sports and travel to all those things is unreal. I could buy a house with some of that stuff. So we had to make some of those choices and do without because we made a decision that she would stay at home. Now, my son, when he got married, his wife had 3 degrees. And so she believed that she had to work because her parents had invested in that. And so he said, what am I going to do? They got married, pregnant, had a boy. And he said, Mom and Dad, I don't know what to do. I don't want her to work. I wish she'd stay at home with my son. And Miss Wisdom said, you have got to trust her to go ahead and go to work, and when she has the baby, she'll decide whether she wants to stay home or not. And she chose, after just having the baby for a few months, she didn't want to go back to work. And so she didn't work either, okay? But those are choices you need to talk about when you're dating. What is our values? What are we going to do? Do we have to keep up with everybody else? So if you live off of one income, that means you're going to probably have a smaller house. That means you're going to drive an older car. That means a lot of things, but it can be done. We've done it. And don't buy the law today that everybody has to keep up with everybody else. I mean, you're going to have to make some sacrifices. And you know how you decide how to live? It's the 80-10-10. You live off of 80% of your income, you give the first 10% to the Lord, and you save 10%. And you do that and you'll be okay. We made a mistake. We always gave more than a tithe to the Lord. Our first full-time ministry, we were married and had a baby, and we were full-time getting paid $100 a week. And we made it. We go back and ask how, we don't know, okay? We have always given more than the tithe. One thing we did not teach our kids well was how to save the 10%. We did not do a good job with that, but we always had to live within our means. So you need to sit down with your families and decide some of those things. And if your decision is both of us are going to work because these are the things we want, that's okay, as long as you sit down and decide. But do that ahead of time if you can while you're dating. Okay.
One thing I can tell you about God is you can't outgive him. And as long as you're faithful to what you give to him, he'll be faithful to what he gives you. I mean, we have more money now than we ever dreamed we would ever have. And that's why we can take our family on trips. But that's because we never cheated God out of his part of our income. Even if we had to go to the bank and take out a loan in order to pay our tithe, we did it. And then we paid the bank back. So trust God. You cannot outgive him, and he will always give back to you more than you give to him.
Any other questions? Usually whenever you say something about money, honey, that takes care of a conversation really quick. So here's the key. Mom and dads, don't get discouraged. Don't get discouraged. Hang in there, pray. Those times when you think, how are my kids going to turn out? You got to turn them over to God as well. And just do your best. Lead by example. Never ask one of the roles for me, I learned from my father. He never asked us as kids to do something he and mom wouldn't do first. That's been our rule from day one. That's been my rule as a pastor. I never asked my staff or elders to tithe if I didn't tithe. I'm a leadership believer. Everything rises and falls on leadership, and you have to lead by example. So mom and dad, hang in there. Don't get discouraged. Your kids have been entrusted to you for the years that you have. Love them all the way you can. Tough love is hard, but just release them to God. And when those grandkids come along, no matter what's happened with your kids, you have a chance to pour back into them and reinforce some of those values. Okay?
I just want to add one thing, because there's something that I think Christians have forgotten, and that is that God is sovereign. It doesn't make any difference whether we like what's going on or we don't understand what's going on. If we believe that God is sovereign and we trust him, then we can relax because he's got it. He's in control. So if you feel like your life is out of control, you need to stop and say, God has this. I trust him. And I don't understand why this is happening in my life. I don't like that it's happening in my life, but I trust him, and he's going to make it work out for whatever is best for me and what is best for his kingdom. And so I think I'm big on God's sovereignty. He has got this. We get all freaked out about what's happening in our nation, and I think it is upsetting. But do we trust God or not? Nothing in this world happens that God's not aware of or that he's not in control of.
Man.
So we got to trust him, guys. We got to.
Thank you.